Thank you. Welcome, everybody, and good evening. It's June 3rd, 2020, Wednesday. City of Providence, Committee on Finance. We're going to call this meeting to order. Roll call vote, Madam Clerk.
Chairman Leosi.
Present.
Vice Chairwoman Ryan.
Present.
Councilwoman Castillo.
Present.
Councilwoman Anthony. Ms. absent. Councilman Taylor. Ms. absent. We have 3 present, 2 absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Committee members, I'd like to request that we take some items out of order first. At this time, I'd like to do, where are we? Oh, no, I guess I want to, I know we had the items from yesterday, is that right? Right?
Yes,
So what we're going to do is we're going to make a motion to continue from the items yesterday to the next finance meeting.
So moved.
Second.
By Vice Chair, second by Councilwoman Vice Chair Ryan, second by Councilwoman Castillo. Discussion, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Let the record reflect that Councilman Taylor is is present.
So noted.
All right, and then now we can get to the other two items on the budget, which is item 2 and 3, which is discussion concerning the actuarial update from Siegel Consultant and discussion relative to the employee retirement system by Wainwright Investment Council. So, Madam Clerk, let's read it directly. We're going to take up items 2 and 3, Madam Clerk.
Yes.
1 second, Mr. Mancini.
Thank you, sir.
Madam Clerk, read 2 and 3 into the record. I'm sorry?
Discussion relative to the
Councilwoman
actuarial.
Anthony is present also, Madam Clerk.
So noted.
Madam Clerk?
Discussion relative to the actuarial update. The following has been invited: Siegel Consulting, Kathleen Riley, and discussion relative to the employee retirement system investment update. The following has been invited: Wainwright Investment Council, Eric Bertinazzi.
Great. Mr. Mancini, and then we'll go from there. Mr. Mancini?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your consideration this evening on bringing in both Ms. Riley and Mr. Bertinazzi, but I don't think it was clear to the other department officials
you're more than welcome. Excuse me, you're excused for this evening, and you'll be brought up at the next finance meeting, and we'll put you on notice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all.
Thank you. So, I know we picked up items 2 and 3. What I'd like to do is, if I could have, I believe, is it Kathleen Riley and Eric Bertinazzi? Are they on the line?
Yes.
Yes.
So, Madam Clerk, can you swear those 2 individuals in, and then I would ask you, one by one to state your name, position, and title.
Please
Madam
raise your
Clerk?
right hand. You swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Yes.
Please state your name and where you're from, please.
This is Kathleen Riley. I am a Senior Vice President and Actuary with Siegel Consulting in our Boston office.
Mr. Bertinazzi?
I am Eric Bertinazzi, Chairman, Chief Executive, and Chief Investment Officer, Wainwright Investment Council in Boston.
And Mr. Mancini?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Lawrence Mancini, Chief Financial Officer, City of Providence. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do.
Thank you all. So, let's start, let the record reflect that Solicitor Cheverini is on the line. So what I'd like to do is, I'd like to start with Siegel first. And Siegel, Ms. Riley, is it? Could you first just tell us what Siegel is and what exactly Siegel does for the City of Providence for the record? What's the purpose of the company for us, okay?
Yes.
You have the mic.
Siegel is a benefits consulting firm, and we've been retained by the Employees Retirement System of the City of Providence to perform annual actuarial evaluations of the retirement system, to do periodic experience studies, and to provide the accounting information that the city needs with respect to the pension liabilities. In addition, is a slightly different team at Siegel, completes an actuarial evaluation of the city's retiree health benefits for the purposes of meeting the accounting requirements for those obligations.
Thank you. And then if Mr. Bernazzi, could you tell us what Wainwright is and what the company does and what you and your company does for the city of Providence?
Thank you. Wainwright Investment Counsel is a registered investment advisor. We advise high net worth individuals and institutions on their portfolio construction, manager due diligence, asset allocation, etc. And we have been the city's pension consultant for over 2 decades, performing those roles.
Thank you, Mr. Bernazzi. Ms. Siegel, Ms. Riley, how long has the Siegel been with the city of Providence?
I think it's about 5 years.
Thank you. Let the record reflect that President Pro Tem Correa is present, as well as Ernie Almonte, our financial consultant, as well as Jimmy Lombardi, the treasurer, and I believe Gina Costa, the internal auditor. I just want to, okay, why don't we do this? So, why don't we go then? What I'd like to do before we continue, because Mr. Almonte has been joining the finance committee the last few meetings and will continue to be working with us in the financial team. And I want to give the committee members, council members, across the public, a little more background on Mr. Almonte, and just quickly talk a little bit about him and who he is. I think it would be important to understand that part of the council's charge and this committee's charge is to navigate through this every year's budget process, and of course this year it's especially more difficult during these financial trying times. So one of the additional elements that the finance team can do is to lean upon outside consultants to help them. In this case, Jimmy Lombardi, the treasurer, Gina Costa, the internal auditor. And they then, we were lucky enough to bring on board Mr. Almonte. I just want to give folks just a little background on Mr. Almonte, just so you all knows a little bit. People don't know him. I know there's a lot of new councilmen on who really haven't been in the city of Providence, stayed around for very long, so they've been maybe 5-10 years, and so there's a lot of new people, and they don't necessarily know who Mr. Almonte is and what he's done in the past. Just very quickly, I just maybe like to know that Mr. Almonte's background is he received his Bachelor's of Science in Business Administration from Bryant University. He also received his Master's degree in Taxation from Bryant University in 1985. He's an honorary Doctor of Business Administration for Bryant University. He attended the Harvard Kennedy School for Government. He's also was selected by the Secretary of the Air Force on the annual National Security Forum at the Air War College. Of course, he's also the Theta Class of Leadership Rhode Island. Just a little more accomplishments with Mr. Almonte is that he works in the United States Department of Defense. He works in the United States General Accounting Office. He is an Association of Government Accountants. He was the national president. He is an American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. He's also the past president of the National State Auditors Association. He's on the Bryan College Board of Trustees. And just to get a little more background, I just think it's important to know that he, of course, started his journey as an accounting back with Renzer and Secosha. He's also an accounting instructor at Bryant University. He was the chairman of the board of the Rhode Island Clean Water Finance Agency. He's been a certified public accountant for over almost 3 decades now, it looks like. And then, of course, he was the Auditor General for the state of Rhode Island for almost 2 decades. He was the individual that the state legislature counted on during those times. The Auditor General, his job was to guide financial policy for the entire state government and budgets. And he also managed, of course, numerous people. I want to give a little background on the gentleman. And Mr. Almonte, you can also fill in all the gaps, but one of the very real important aspects of that we're lucky to have Mr. Almonte on board is his experience with the state budget over the decades, his experience from the legislative point of view, understanding the ins and outs of how administrations operate with, as well as how legislatures operate with budgets, is going to be a great help during this difficult times. I want to mention to the committee members, to the council members, and to the public, because it's important that the public knows that the city council and the leadership, under leadership President Matos and Mr. Lombardi and Ms. Costa has taken the initiative to bring such a person with an esteemed background to help us navigate through these waters. Before I get to Councilman Anthony, I want to let the record reflect that Councilman Pedro Espinola is present.
So noted.
Mr. Almonte, do you want to say a few words, and then I'll have Councilwoman Anthony, I guess she has a question.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Chairman and members of the council. I appreciate this opportunity to work with all of you, but I have nothing else to add, but thank you for stating my background. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Almonte. Councilwoman Anthony.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for introducing Mr. Almonte. I've heard wonderful things about him, and I'm thrilled he's part of the team. So thank you very, very much. I just wanted to know what his task is going to be, and is there a deliverable at the end? I'm just, and I didn't know if was there an RFP that went out? I mean, I'm just not sure what exactly he's tasked with. So if you could elaborate on that, I'd be so appreciative.
Mr. Almonte, do you want to take it, or Jimmy, or Gina?
I can start with the process.
Gina Costa, Internal Order.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you, everybody hear Gina?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Internal Order.
There was a letter to the Board of Contract and Supply that was approved on the last board. And he was going to be assisting with the budget process and looking into the potential plans, and there will be a report at the end. I've been talking with him daily. I believe Jim Lombardi's been talking with him daily. And it's just to give us some guidance and another outside look on this budget.
Mr. Lombardi, did you want to say something? Councilman? Mr. Lombardi? Okay.
Yeah, no, I think Gina said it all.
Okay. Mr. Almonte?
The only additional things that I would add to that is my role is to take my many years, almost 40 years experience in finance, government finance, advising federal, state, and local government, and bringing that skill set to help all of you make the informed decisions based upon my education, my experience, and my contacts all over the country to find out similar issues in similar states. And I've dealt with issues, whether it's money that comes from the federal government, compliant with federal rules and regulations, following state regulations. So I know government finance, bonding, pension, all of those things inside and out. Been a national and international speaker on those topics. And I also was the chairman of all the CPAs in the country, 600,000 CPAs in the world. I was the chairman of the board and an advisor to the Comptroller General of the United States, who's the top auditor to the United States government, and wrote all the, I was one of 8 people who helped write all the auditing standards for the whole country, all states, and all cities and towns. So the gray hair is part of my many years experience in this.
Thank you, Mr. Almonte. Councilwoman Anthony, you have a follow-up question or statement?
I think that's wonderful. I'm so appreciative of your help. I'm hoping that what we might do, and with the permission of the chair, is I hope that, after we have a presentation from all the departments, that we'll be able to have a working session with you so that you can share with us some of the experience in your recommendations, so that we might be able to have, a full discussion on the budget with you so that we can ask you questions and have an opportunity to have a committee meeting where we can have an open process and talk about what you might recommend. I look forward to that.
Thank you.
Okay, that's a good suggestion.
Thank you.
So I just, I know it took a little more time, but I want to make sure I introduce Mr. Almonte and how he's going to interact with the process. That was important. If we can now go to, what I'd like to do is, and I'm going to defer to Ms. Riley and Mr. Bernazzi. In order for, now think of it this way, think of it for people who don't know much about the budget. Should we go with you, Eric, or you, Ms. Riley, first on the process, on what each distinctive roles do, so it can be very, very easier to digest of what the system is. So I defer to which one, who would like to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay.
Not because the actuarial stuff is easier. Actually, I think it's probably not as familiar a concept as, investments and investing assets and expected returns on portfolios and how it grows with interest. So I'll just take a minute just to talk a little bit about doing an actuarial valuation, which is a measurement of the liabilities of the retirement system as of a particular point in time. It takes into account your current retirees who are collecting benefits, and it takes into account your current employees who are earning benefits and are projected to receive benefits in the future. So there are a lot of assumptions that are baked into determining the cost of a retirement system. We have to estimate how long people will live. We have to estimate when they will retire, whether they'll become disabled, how long they'll work for the city, or whether they'll terminate employment without retiring, whether they'll die before retirement. We have to project the retirement benefits that they're going to receive at retirement, which is a function of their current salary and your formulas to calculate benefits. But we have to project what those salary levels will be at retirement and what those benefits will be at retirement. So we have to project, we project the benefits that we expect the retirement system to pay out, and then we discount them back to the measurement date, assuming that the assets will earn a particular rate of return. And I think this is now where we hit the link with the investment advisor, because the investment advisor, then invests those assets. When we look at the assumed rate of return on those assets, we look at the asset allocation of the investment portfolio, and we look at expected returns for various asset classes in the future. So while everybody really focuses on recent returns and historical returns for retirement systems, when we set the investment return assumption, the past really doesn't matter. It's really what we expect to happen going forward. That statement you see on the bottom of financial statements, past performance is no indication of future performance. Well, that's really how we go about establishing the investment return assumption. We're currently using an 8% investment return assumption, and we are reviewing that in conjunction with the experience study that we're performing. And I'll be quite straightforward. We expect to make a pretty strong recommendation about lowering that assumed investment return assumption. We think the markets have changed, the expectations going forward have changed, and 8% is probably not an achievable assumption. And not sure.
For point of clarification, I think for the committee and for the council and the public, when you're talking about the rate of return that's been set in the present system, which is 8% rate of return, correct?
Yes.
Right. Presently, right now, every pension system puts forward a proposed rate of return that their goal is to meet either 7% or 8% on a yearly basis of a rate of return, and that's part of plugging in the numbers to see what your liabilities are and expenses and all that stuff, right?
Correct.
Right now, you just mentioned, I guess you said right now the present rate of return for the city of Providence is 6%, and you're going to be making a suggestion, I guess, in the near future to lower that rate of return. But before we get to that, because I'd like to know, what does that mean when we lower it, and what does it mean to the bottom line? Can you tell us right now, where are we now with the system itself? is the city's pension system a healthy system, first of all? Finan-
So there are different ways to measure health of a retirement system. And
Mhm.
I'll run through a couple of them. Some are stronger than others. When I think about your retirement system and your metrics, the things we look at, you have a pretty low funded ratio. And that funded ratio, when we did the GASB report for fiscal 19, so the June 30, 19 fiscal report, the system is 26% funded. That's low and that's concerning.
So the system itself in total is 26% funded at this
Yes.
time, correct?
Yes.
And now, by the way, your last report was 2019, and you're working on the 2020, is that what's happening?
So we've done, we've got a couple of things in progress. We're working on an experience study. We're working on a full valuation as of July 1, 19, but we've done accounting numbers as of June 30, 19. So when I said 26% funded, that was based on an old valuation rolled forward to June 30, 19. So that 26% funded is the most recent number we have.
Right, and then now it potentially may be less because of a lower number based on what's transpired, potentially, right?
It could, yeah.
So just to give a comparison, do you know what the funded ratio of the state of Rhode Island's pension system? Is it 26%? Is it 40%, 50%? Do you have any idea?
I do not remember that off the top of my head.
Mr. Almonte, do you know that number by any chance? The latest? You know? Just so committee
Mr. Chairman,
members.
I do not, but I'm looking it up right now.
Yeah,
I know it's much higher than 26%. 26% is quite low.
60%.
Yeah, and it's a little bit over 60, I think, maybe
Yeah.
64, but I'll
So the
check
state of
it.
Rhode Island, the state of Rhode Island's pension system is 60% funded. City of Providence is 26% funded as of the snapshot of June 2019. Correct? Correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Riley. Right? Is that
That's
correct?
correct. That's
Right.
correct.
So now, so what does that mean now on the when they talk about that? That means it has an unfunded portion. What's the number value of the unfunded portion at this time?
In June 30, 19, it was $1,036 million.
It was 1,036.
36 million, yes.
36, 1,036 mil. Now, I got, was it 1,378,000? No, that was 2018, right?
1,378 of the liabilities. The unfunded liability in 19 was 1 billion. If you want to use rounded numbers, I mean, I think we could call it $1 billion.
Good. Okay, all right. And then I know everybody has the actual report, your latest one. I think it would be helpful that if you can go to page, I think 24 and maybe 25 of your pages, committee members. And could you
25, I think 25 is the best page to look at, to be
Yeah.
quite honest.
Could you go to 20? I'm going to defer to you because you're the expert.
Yep.
Committee members go to page 25, and well, I got halfway there. Then I did okay.
Yep.
So can you take us through what is this funding schedule? What does it mean, and what does it say? What should it say to the layperson such as myself? What should I understand about it?
Okay. So I'm going to focus on a couple of the columns here. These were the numbers prepared at the beginning of fiscal 19. So they were projected, for the projected through 2040 in this schedule. So you can see how they're expected to change over time. So you referred to the number in column 9, which are the liabilities at $1,378 million. So, at the beginning of the fiscal year, you had assets shown in column 10 to offset that, the 367 million. And the difference is shown in column 11. That was the unfunded liability at the beginning of the fiscal year, 1,010 million at the beginning of the fiscal year. And you can see the funded ratio there at 26.67%. What this schedule says is you've got an unfunded liability, and we call it a funding schedule. I also think of it as a budget. This is the budget that we've put together for you to fully fund all of your obligations by 2040. It's a big task, but it's in big terms. It's a relatively short time frame. It's 22 years from 2019 through 2040 when you include the end points there. For, a public sector ongoing retirement system, that's, you're an ongoing entity. You don't have to worry about funding your obligations over 2 or 3 years. Obviously, the sooner you take care of this, the better, but this is the budget. So you have 2 things you need to take care of when we talk about the budget. We want to get rid of that unfunded liability. And think of the unfunded liability as benefits that have already been earned that haven't been funded. But in addition, you also have current employees who continue to earn benefits, and you have to continue to fund those benefits. And the number that you have to think about in terms of funding those benefits are shown in column 2, the employer normal cost. And that's the amount that the employer has to set aside, the city has to set aside each and every year to fund the current year's benefits. So the budget has to cover item 2 and make a payment on item 11, the unfunded liability. And that's what we've shown here. We've shown column 2 is your employer normal cost payments. Columns 3 and 4 is a schedule to pay down that unfunded liability. So what you're really looking at is for a total cost for the city is the amount shown in column 5. That's the sum of the employer normal cost and the payments on the unfunded liability.
So for June of 2019, the end of that fiscal year, the goal would have been that the city of Providence should pay $83,357,367. Is that correct?
That's it. That's it.
And so column 5 is the one. So if we didn't have an unfunded liability, column 4 would not exist. Is that correct?
You are right. That's very
Right?
good. Yes.
Right? So basically, if this was a funded operation, we'd be talking about just coming up with $8.6 million. Let's say, for sake of conversation, and last year's budget, which is about roughly $700 million budget. But
Yes.
because the unfunded liability, we have to come up with 83 million plus. I see.
Yes. And if you look at the
God.
last row there, look at how the cost drops in the last year from 174 million to 20 million. That's when you become fully funded, you free up all those payments.
Right, but that's 40 years down. This is a 40-year in the 40-year making, right?
It's a 20-year schedule. You'll be done in 2040.
I'm sorry, 20-year schedule, my apologies. It's a 20-year schedule, right?
Yep.
And this is based on an 8% assumption, is this correct?
Yes.
All right, so that means at least an 8% rate of return each year.
Yes. And you have to meet, there's a big caveat here. This is a projection of the budget, and it assumes that all your assumptions will be met and that you won't change any assumptions. And we know, and I can tell you order of magnitude, we know that we're going to recommend, and we're likely to recommend an assumption change. So that's going to change these numbers. But this gives you a sense of what we're talking about here in terms of employer contributions. They do increase over time. They increase at roughly a rate of 3.5% per year. And if you look at column 11, you see that the unfunded liability doesn't change much in the initial years, but it does eventually start to decrease. Similar to the mortgage, you don't make much progress on the mortgage in the initial years. We don't make much progress initially here on the mortgage, although the funded ratio increases slightly. You see most of your progress in the last few years.
Now, you said this is based on an assumption of an 8% rate of return. So if the city did, it sounds like you're going to recommend a reduction of 7%. Would these numbers all go up or down? Would they change?
They would go up because you'd expect to make less on your assets, a smaller return on your assets, so you have to make it up through employer contributions.
Okay. Councilman Taylor, you have your hand up. Do you have a question about this time, sir?
Yeah, first one is, when did column 3 come in? Was that always there?
Column 3, I don't remember I'm not sure that the history in column 3 is a little bit before us, but at one point there was a contribution that wasn't made. And this is essentially the schedule to make up that payment.
Okay, and also since, I think you said 5 years you've been doing it?
Yes.
Okay, so for the 5 years, because we don't go back, but from, I guess, 2014, have we been meeting column 5s?
Yes, and actually, so that was the other, that's an excellent question. That was the other metric that I wanted to talk about. You know, so I think when you take the snapshot picture here, you have a low funded ratio. It's pretty obvious. But the other part of it is, do you have a plan in place to address the obligations? Yes, here's the plan on page 25 of the valuation report. And then the second question is, well, you've got the plan, but are you budgeting it? And that's where you can be very pleased to know that you have been making those actuarially determined contributions, and in some years, a little bit more than the actuarially determined contribution.
Okay. At some point, like what can we, like if everything stays the same, but what can we do as a city besides raising the contributions for the current or the future employees?
You can look at the benefits.
Because the retirees are going to stay the same. Once they retire, they're not going to be putting any more money in.
Yeah. So it's really, there are only so many levers that you can pull. So you can raise the amount of money that goes into the plan, whether it's through employer contributions or employee contributions. I'm not suggesting this because you don't have enough assets to work with. You know, some people would say that you could potentially adopt a more aggressive investment strategy and try and increase the expected rate of return. I don't think that's really on the table here, given the current asset allocation and the current markets. But you know, you could look at ways to increase the investment return. And then if those are ways to bring money into the system, the only other thing you can look at is how to lower the benefits that you expect to pay out. So plan design changes.
And have we been meeting? I know you said it's 8% now, but has it been 8? Let's say since 2000. Well, you took over in 5 years, so since 2014, has it been 8% all along, or higher or lower?
It's been erratic, and I think it's probably better to let Wayne answer that question because they will have even more up-to-date information.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Ms. Riley, you can continue with your presentation.
Well, so you talked about metrics. I did want to make the point that you have a policy established to fund the system by 2040. That's the first part of it. And then you're funding it. That's the second part of it. So I think then the next most significant question would be, what's likely to come out of the experience study that we're working on now? The experience study is a review of all of the assumptions used in the valuation. And it's a comprehensive review done every 5 years. In addition to this comprehensive review, though, we actually look at the assumptions each and every year. And we really are not seeing volatility in the experience relative to the assumptions, other than the investment performance assumptions, which is what you would expect. So although we're doing a detailed experience study, I don't expect there to be many changes that come out of that study, with two exceptions, which I'll talk to you about. Those two exceptions are the assumptions that everybody talks about when you're talking about retirement systems, and that's mortality, how long are people living, and investment performance. So the good news is people are living longer. The bad news is that increases the cost of the retirement system. So we need to continually monitor the mortality assumption being used in the valuation. It has not generated large gains or losses, but that does not mean it doesn't need to be, updated on a regular basis. So there's one potential source of additional cost, is updating that mortality assumption. The other assumption, though, that I know I've been hinting at, and I'll be pretty straightforward, I really think we should look at a reduction in the investment return assumption, most likely to at least 7.5%. And ideally, you know, if money were no obstacle, it would be even lower. And lowering the investment return assumption increases obligations. We had looked at this based on some modeling we've done, and lowering the assumption from 8 to 7.5%, so 0.5% or 50 basis points, adds about $73 million to the unfunded liability. So that $73 million would have to be funded over the next 20 years. And initially, it would increase the actuarially determined contribution, that column 5 number, by about $5 million. Not an insignificant number. And that $5 million would grow at the 3.5% increase that we see throughout the schedule on page 25. I think those are the key points of the valuation, is where we stand now and what we're likely to be looking at when we do another valuation or in the near term.
Ms. Riley, the report that's before us, will you be updating this report?
Yes.
Will we be getting that for June of, I guess, either July 1st of 2020? That's when we'll receive it?
It's actually, we're actually doing the report as of the beginning of fiscal 2020. So it's the July 1/19 report. And quite honestly,
okay,
it should have been done by now, but with the working remotely options that we're all working remotely, and we're getting work done, but it is taking longer to get things done in this remote environment, and to still, you know, do all the quality control checks that we need. So we will have the experience study and the valuation report completed in July. It will be
July for 2019, correct?
2019. Yes.
Correct. Okay. So, and then, okay, and that's part of, I guess you just mentioned a couple of recommendations. I also want to make sure that your funding schedule is based on no pension reform at all at this time, correct?
Correct.
Right. And is there any reamortization in your schedule?
There isn't in the schedule. I mean, it's one of the things that we've talked to Mr. Mancini about, is potentially looking at that. This schedule, as you can see, reduces the unfunded liability to 0 by 2040.
So reamortize it and then also lower the rate of return. All right.
It's an option. It's a consideration.
Okay. And then can you take us through, I guess, does page, I think we'll maybe go to page 26 and talk about the classes.
Yes.
And what that means. That's okay. And then I'll have Mr. Almonte and Councilman Taylor.
So we did jump over page 24. And the reason I jumped over page 24 is the key numbers from 24 were the starting point of that schedule on page 25. What page 26 shows is the breakdown of these numbers, and it's just a snapshot. It's just the first couple of areas of the schedule, but it's the breakdown of the various components of the valuation by class. So by Class A, Class B, police, Class B, fire. On this page, you see a Class B total, but if you were to add up the first 3 columns, they'd add up to the numbers that were on page 24. So it's just a breakdown of the total cost of the system. There are a couple of key things to look at. If you compare Class A to the Class B totals, there are a couple of key numbers to look at. Let's look at that employer normal cost. That's the cost of the benefits earned by those employees. You can see that the Class A employees cost the city about $1.8 million, the $1,780,000. and the Class B police cost about $3.5 million, and the Class B fire about $2.8 million. Very different numbers for different populations. We show them as a percentage of payroll, and that's where you really can appreciate the differences. Group Class A employees are significantly less costly than Class B employees, and that's for a couple of reasons. One, primarily it's the plan design, which is typical in a public sector plan. Class B participants tend to earn their full benefits at much younger ages because of the requirements of the job. Class B employees typically can't work as long as Class A employees. So while you've raised the eligibility for Class A employees, and you've also raised them for Class B employees, they are still lower for Class B employees. In addition, Class B employees have a higher incidence of disability benefits, and that adds to the cost. So that's the, excuse me, I think that's the first key, the most significant difference here. You see it in the employer normal cost as a percentage of payroll, but then you also see it in the total fiscal 20 contribution shown in row 7. Class A contribution, their portion of the actuarially determined contribution, or that column 5 number, represents about 29% of their payroll. But if you look at the Class B numbers for police and fire, much higher percentages, 87% and 105%. Again, the same explanation as the normal cost explanation. Class B, police and fire employees are eligible to retire at early ages, do retire at early ages, have a higher incidence of disability, nature of the job. And they also, I didn't mention it earlier, but another key factor is they also have less turnover. More of the police and fire that you hire at younger ages stay to retirement because they have good jobs and good benefits. There's much more turnover amongst your Class A employees, and that affects what you have to pay out in retirement benefits for those groups.
Okay. All right. Mr. Almonte?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Riley, I have a couple of questions for you based upon what you just mentioned and looking at your report. Can you give us an idea? Have you done the stress test? 1% less and 1% more than 8%?
Mr. Almonte, Mr. Almonte, hang on 1 second. Could I ask everybody else to mute on their side when someone's speaking? Because what happens is they hear all the feedback. Mr. Almonte, could you restate your question, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Riley, I have a few questions related to both the report and to what you mentioned. I do agree with you. I consider the numbers to be concerning with the low percentage of funding, the 26%. I know the Auditor General issues a report and puts the state and different cities and towns in the different categories, what percentage they're unfunded, and less than 60% is you're in the serious category for them, and clearly 26% is even much lower than 60%. And I do know in business, although cities and towns are not subject to ERISA, under ERISA, if you're lower than 80%, there's all additional requirements that are put in, restrictions on pension plans. So I agree with you. I consider the 26% to be quite concerning. And we know, my question is, have you done the stress test to do 1% below on the rate of return and 1% above? And what would those numbers be?
Yeah, those numbers are part of the accounting disclosure report, which has been sent to the city, and after the meeting, I can resend it so that you can find it easily. And the impact on just have to.
Ms. Riley, can you make sure you send it to the internal auditor and the treasurer?
Yes, yes.
So they can then get it to Mr. Almonte and to any committee members or council members who want it.
Yes.
So, Ms. Riley.
I have the impact on the unfunded liability. We can carry it through to the funding schedule, but we haven't done that. Certainly can do that. But just the impact on the unfunded liability, the 1% decrease to 7%, I'm going to give you the difference in the numbers, adds $156 million. The 1% increase in the assumption, which we really wouldn't be considering, lowers the liability by $130 million.
Okay, so where the state, so thank you for that, and I agree. I rough numbers, I had 153 just running the numbers, so that makes sense to me. So my question would be the state uses 7%. Why wouldn't we recommend that the city use 7%? What would be the rationale to pick a number in between?
Well, you know, when you look at establish an investment return assumption, there isn't one right answer about what it's an expectation. It's a lot of informed information that goes into developing a range of reasonable assumptions. So there isn't one answer. There isn't one right or wrong answer. So when you looking at the range of assumptions, I think the decision on where you end up often is what, the impact on the budget. Certainly, if you can afford, the idea in my mind, in the ideal world, you have as low an assumption as you can afford to fund, because then you're much more likely to make that assumption and not have any unexpected surprises and changes in the budget the month that you expect to fund. But keep in mind, it is only an assumption. What ultimately drives the numbers are the actual returns. Having said that, I agree with you. The lower you can get it, the better. But there are the practical concerns of having to fund it, and I think that's the balancing act that the city's dealing with, as most retirement systems are.
I understand your description that way, but isn't it more than affordability? Shouldn't the focus really be on what is the realistic number related to the rate of return? I do know if you lower it, the unfunded liability goes up, the annual requirements go up, but isn't best to have what we all believe is the realistic number? Yes, it is. But I don't think anybody would. I think you kind of when certain numbers are unreasonable, like nobody would be assuming a 10% return. I've hinted strongly that I think we need to lower this investment return assumption. One of the reasons I've hinted so strongly is, as we've looked at it in the past, we were able to support the 7.5%, the 8% assumption based on the then asset allocation and capital market assumptions. Moving forward, capital market assumptions have come down. I think it's going to be harder to support it, if we can at all, at 8%. So I think what we're talking about here is we're going to likely come in and say, you need to lower it, and at least to this point, and anything more than that is wonderful. I hope that I hope that answers your questions, but it also addresses, sort of highlights the considerations that we have. So we look at it. The assumption is the cities and the retirement systems to set. If we can support it, we will use it. If we can't support it, then we will have to disclose in our report that it's not supportable. And that doesn't typically happen. But what I'm saying is, you look at this assumption and it seems high. It's high relative to current environment. It was certainly reasonable for 2018. We're definitely looking at it for the 2019 and 2020 valuations. Okay. And Mr. Chairman, I just have two more questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, yes, Mr. Monti, and then we'll have Councilman Taylor, Councilwoman Anthony, then Mr. Mancini. Right? Okay. Right, Mr. Almonte?
So just two more questions. One of them is the approximately $1 billion unfunded liability, even at the 8% rate. How does that compare to similar size budget cities across the country? Would this be unfunded liability be at the higher end, the middle, or the lower end of unfunded liabilities?
Oh, it's definitely at the higher end. Look at the funded ratio tells you that. And the benefit, the funded ratio tells you that, and you look at the funding cost as a percentage of payroll, how high it is. I mean, the benefits are pretty, it's on the higher end.
Yeah, and I agree with you in both those statements. 'Cause the last question is, you went in that direction, and I agree there too. The cost as a percentage of payroll is quite high. Can you explain to the council what some of the factors are that affect the cost as a percentage of payroll?
It's two factors. It's the design, which sets the initial level, and then it's the fact that it's only 26% funded, and you still have a lot of benefits to fund that have been earned but haven't been funded.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Taylor, then Councilwoman Anthony. Councilman Taylor?
Yes, rolling the clock back to the 2014. For each of those years, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, were we 26% funded or less? No, if I looked at a 2014 sheet compared to this, were we going to be out of the clear in 2041 or more time or less time?
The schedule is still 2040 because that's a fixed schedule. So when there are changes, it just affects the amount that you have to put in over that short period, over that period of time. Just seeing if I have whether I can easily find. I've got a lot of windows open here in a small size, so I can see your screen. I want to see if the historical numbers show funded ratios here. My suspicion is you were better funded, and either better funded or about the same percentage funded. And the reason I say that is I know that when we originally started this valuation, we were using an 8.25% investment return assumption. So we've already made one adjustment to the investment return assumption. So, as you might imagine, or hopefully it won't be a surprise after this explanation, when we change the investment return, if and when we change the investment return assumption, those funded percentages that you saw on page 25 in the schedule, they're going to drop because we changed the assumption. The liabilities go up and the assets don't change. You're going to have a larger unfunded liability, a lower funded ratio, and then you're still going to get to the end point by 2040 unless you re-amortize. So you asked what was it like in 2014? My suspicion is it was about the same.
Okay. And also the difference between, I understand the A and B because it's two different classes, but the Class B police and the Class B fire, why such a difference with those two? Because they both, the 32.5,
they have their slight plan provision differences. Class B has a slightly higher contribution rate, but it also could be demographic driven. They're actually not. I don't want to sound like I'm contradicting you. I don't view them as being that different. If you look at that row 1 number, the percent of payroll number, the police is 18.85% of payroll and the fire at 18.4%. That's the plan design. So those are pretty close percentages. The demographics of the group could be a little bit different. I think there might be a new fire class in this valuation, which might lower the age of the group and then the cost a little bit.
Okay. Also, as a retired Class B fire, my question is, if you become, say you come on the job at 20 years old, we pay into the system for 32.5 years.
Yeah.
So I come on at 20, I do my 32.5, I'm at 52.5. Now, since then, we've raised the numbers to, on the police side, we've raised it to 63. And on the fire side, we've raised it to both 63 and 67 for the fire chief. How does that, as I argued against it, that I didn't think we should be raising to until we did something else. So for 32 and a half, so for 32 and a half years, I pay into the system. Then after 32 and a half, I'm not paying into the system. Right? So if I stay on the job until I'm 63. So I'm doing almost, I'm doing 10 and a half years, and I'm not paying into the system, but I can still go up in rank and do whatever, I'm a captain, then I become a chief, then I become a deputy chief. And then if I want to become the chief of the department, I can stay to 67. So for 14 and a half years, I'm not paying into the system, but I'm going to be taking out a pension at a bigger rate. How does that affect?
Yeah.
By raising the rates, because we did it in police. Police went from 60 to 63 through this time of between 2014 and now, since you've taken over. So all those policemen can stay on until that extra time, but then they're not paying into the system.
Yeah, so we think that's great that they stay on. So I'll tell you why. Their benefits, it depends on the tier of benefits that people are in, but people max out on those benefits. So yes, there are years when they're not paying contributions. And yes, they're not paying contributions, and yes, they are getting payroll increases, but they're also not collecting those benefits. And the net impact of the three of those, that not collecting those benefits, is really powerful on lowering the cost of the retirement system. So, people, you think about how life expectancies have changed. People retiring at age 50, people working 20 or 25 years, and I know it's not 20 years anymore, but let's use a 25-year example. Somebody coming in at age 25 and working 20 years, let's do 25 and 25. Somebody comes in at 25, works 25, and retires at age 50, right? And you think, oh, that's a really long career. And maybe police and fire, some people can't work past age 50, but you've worked for 25 years, contributed for 25 years, you could be collecting that benefit for 35 or 40 years. And as people have started living longer, that's where the imbalance is. People, recently there have been changes to raise the age at which people can retire. And that's sort of lagged the longer life expectancy. So you're right. You're not taking contributions in from the members, and you are still getting pay increases. And maybe promotional increases too, which can be pretty significant. But the savings on paying out the benefits for fewer years can be huge.
More than taking out the money. More than if they retire early.
Yep.
But if you retire, say I come out at 20, I go to 67, and then I retire because Class A and B have it, I can take all my money out. How does that affect the system? Because now I'm taking more money out. I'm taking my money out, plus I'm taking more, and I haven't paid in for the last 14 and a half years.
So from an actuarial standpoint, because it's an actuarial equivalent amount, theoretically it doesn't affect the system. Because
I'm getting the reduced pension.
Yeah, because
right?
It doesn't have an impact on the unfunded liability, because the amount that's coming out of the assets is coming out of the liabilities. That's the amount you expected to pay. You expected to pay it over time on a present value basis, lump sum or over time, doesn't matter. That's the theoretical comment. I mean, I think but the downside to that is it does reduce the assets on hand, meaning you have fewer investment opportunities, fewer assets to work with, and fewer investment opportunities. I do not think it's the right decision for participants. It's a defined benefit pension plan. You could live well into your 90s, and you could run out of money if you have the responsibility of investing it yourself. Not just investing it yourself, but in a defined benefit plan, you pool your longevity experience. You might outlive your life expectancy. Somebody else might not. You don't know who's going to do that. So there are a lot of reasons that it's and not a sound financial decision. Whether it's a sound financial decision for the retirement system, that's hit or miss. If the system returns you take it out in years when the system has investment losses, then the system doesn't have to make up the money. But if you take it out and there have been gains, you've given up all those returns. So again, we don't know when that's a sort of a market timing comment. So I don't want to focus on that one.
Right. Okay. Now, last time I know you were here. Last question. Last question.
Okay, because we have people with their hands up.
Well, last question. Last time that you were here, I believe you talked about the Cambridge. I think it was Cambridge. That they had a good system that we should look into or follow, something like that. How did their system do in the last year since we talked? I believe you said you did Cambridge. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep. We do several
Okay.
cities in Massachusetts.
So we stayed even. We went 26%. What was theirs?
I think we're in the middle of doing it. Their numbers.
Okay, you haven't done it yet. Okay.
Their numbers have gone up though, but they were fun, and I can their reports are public and posted, so I can tell you this. You can look them up. They have a schedule that has them fully funded in 2026, 6 more years. So when you look at your schedule, and remember, I said it's like a mortgage. You don't make much progress on the unfunded liability in the early years. You make all the progress at the end.
They're on the bottom, the end.
And they're making big progress on those numbers.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Anthony, please.
I was just going to ask for a copy of the stress test report that Mr. Almonte has requested.
Okay, of course. Can we make sure we get that?
Yep. It's not a formal stress test report. It's shown in the accounting report, but I will forward that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Make it easy, Ms. Riley. Just forward it to the internal and the treasurer, and then they will make sure the committee members and the council members receive it. Mr. Almonte? Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it was Councilman Taylor asked earlier about comparing a few years ago to today. I believe that was a question about the unfunded liability. I went back to the last Auditor General's report. The last report listed the city of Providence. This is June 30th, 2009. So part of this is a statement, part of it is a question for the actuary. You go back to June 30, 2009, the unfunded liability was $804 million, and now it's $1 billion. The unfunded percentage was 33.5%, and now I believe it's 26%. So we seem to be going in the wrong direction. And that's not even considering lowering the rate of return. So can you, as far as the actuary, can you explain what, for the council, what would be some of the reasons why this, if they're making 100% of the contributions, why would the liability keep going up? And I know you can imagine, I know the answer, but for the council to know.
There are probably 3 reasons contributing to that. One is, I know there's been at least one investment return assumption, one assumption change in there, and there could have been others. So it could have been a change of assumptions that added liability. The other reason, I'm going to hit the 2 easier ones first. Remember when we looked at page 25 in the report, the unfunded liability was projected to increase. So it probably was projected to increase some anyway. But my suspicion is a big part of it is, I don't know whether that unfunded liability was calculated using market value of assets or not. It probably was used using a smoothed value of assets, and it probably did not reflect all of the 2008 investment losses. That's an actuarial concept that I glossed over a little bit today, but I think it's probably all 3 of those factors.
So I guess the follow-up to that would be, looking at the numbers and looking at the rate of return, we're in worse position today than we were in 2009.
I think I do, I'm not sure which years, I know there were some years when you weren't making 100% of your ADC, and that's not recently. So I think that's, I mean, I don't disagree with you. Earlier you asked the metrics, and I said, look, funded ratio isn't great, but you have a budget and you're sticking to it. You know, and that's the way you have to, because that's what's going to solve this problem going forward, is setting a budget and sticking to it.
Thank you.
If I just, and let the record reflect that President Matos is present, I just want to make sure, just to kind of dovetail on Mr. Almonte, but the bottom line is from '09 to the present, even with us making the 100% contribution, the unfunded liability has grown and the health of the pension system has gotten worse. And that's, if I may say, that's directly related to lack of pension reform, that we've missed numerous opportunities in the past 6 years, 7 years, in which we have completely ignored pension reform during this time. We had an opportunity with, when the administration unilaterally breached the fire contract, using the state statute to negotiate a first ever 5-year labor contract for a municipality, versus the fire one. And as you know, the state statute says municipalities have to only do 3-year CBAs, but you can do 5-year CBAs if your pension system is in dire straits and meets all that criteria. And then, of course, the goal would be, there's a quid pro quo. The city or town would give that union a 5-year contract, but in return, they would give pension reform. Instead, the city lost the lawsuit, spent millions of dollars, no pension reform, and gave them a 5-year contract. So that's where that just further exacerbated where we are today. And every contract negotiations, there's never been there hasn't been any time when there's a discussion. And I know me and the council members and former council members have mentioned numerous times of where is the pension reform, where's the changes. And some council members would stand up and vote against those contracts. The minority in number, of course, I would be one of them, and we would lose. But we understood that what happened is that pension reform is no longer a watchword in the city of Providence, nor a concern. But the idea is just that we're making our pension payment, we're making 100%, so be it. But the problem is that pension payment grows exponentially every year. Meanwhile, that's also banking on assumptions of rate of return, and also that everything will be fine financially. Let's view it this way: pre-COVID-19, now post-COVID-19, which clearly, by the way, is going to take, if it took over a decade for us to get out of the 2008 financial problem, it's going to take at least a decade plus to get out of the COVID-19 financial problem. So I just want to give a little context there. It's a perfect example where lack of conviction for pension reform in the city itself, every time they negotiate, has further just created this dire results, which is greater unfunded pension liability and a smaller percentage of funding. And when we get to Wainwright, we can talk about how much money is actually in the account, and you'll see an age chart there. And you'll see, by the way, for the past decade or so, although the rate of return's been good and we've done a very good job, the amount of money pretty much is stagnated, how much is actually in the account. But we'll get to that. Mr. Mancini? Is there a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have both a comment and a question. So my comment is, and it runs along the lines of Mr. Almonte, Councilman Taylor, and the remarks made by Ms. Riley of Siegel. While we have steadfastly honored 100% pension contributions, I believe now 7 consecutive years, and while I'm keenly aware of the need to bring the city's assumed rate of return from the current 8% to a more realistic rate, as Mr. Almonte used the term, I believe the state general treasurer, while the state's investment return assumption is at 7%, I think he too would say bring it lower to even 6.5%. And I have given this testimony before in this committee and in the presence of the state treasurer. And while it is not the measurement that is generally utilized, Ms. Riley referred to it, it's what you could afford in the determination of that. I think the treasurer and certainly the internal auditor or her predecessor would agree that the last time we revisited the lowering of the assumed rate of return from 8.5% to 8%, it was done in a phased-in basis over 2 fiscal years because the profound impact of even a quarter point, Ms. Riley talked in terms of 50 basis points. Former Auditor General Almonte talked about 1 full point. We used the math then. A quarter point reduction was a $4 million impact to the operating budget year over year and added $25 million to the unfunded liability. So while Mr. Almonte cited figures from 2009, despite the steady 100% payment of the pension plan ADC or ARC, the ARC as it was known then, that immediate reduction in the assumed rate of return added $30 million a year per quarter point, nearly $60 million. The math proves out a 1 full point change to 7% to be fiscally responsible will be imprudent to the city's general health right today. The operating budget would increase by close to $10 million for that pension contribution. So while I share that knowledge and I share certainly the concerns of both the council and our outside advisors and certainly Mr. Almonte in his heralded capacity, while we're well aware of it, you're right, Mr. Chairman, other reforms could assist in that. There was conversation at one time that a large contribution would make a significant difference, and I think that is something that has been under consideration and we might consider in the future. Mr. Chairman, I have one question for Ms. Riley, and I think it would be helpful for the Council Finance Committee and other members because it would help clear up some conversation. So if I may, Mr. Chairman, through you, may I ask Ms. Riley a question?
Yes, please.
Ms. Riley, could you explain to the Council and others how the basis of the city's annual determined contribution, the annual ARC payment, how is it predicated as far as payment, and what happens if that payment is made earlier than June 30 at any year? Is there, in fact, a reduction in the payment that is generated as a result of earlier contributions to the pension plan? Would you be kind enough to explain that?
Yes. So because it's a pension valuation and take into account the time value of money, we talked to the city about what their pattern of when their typical paying of the employer contribution was. And when we first started 5+ years ago, it was at the end of the year or beyond. So the schedule that you saw, that page 25 that we keep referring to, the funding schedule, that assumes that the payment will be made at the end of the year. So relative to making the payment at the beginning of the year, it's 8% higher, because if the system had the money at the beginning of the year, it would be assumed to grow at 8%. So we increased that payment by 8%. If you make it earlier, we're able to lower the actuarial determined contribution. You're able to lower the amount that you put in and still but still you're 100% funded. I don't want to imply that paying it earlier and paying a lower amount will make it look like you're not funding your ARC. We will recalculate the ARC and lower that also to reflect the actual payment.
So if we were to make a payment of $70 million in July, if we had that ability, what would that mean to the city in terms of its pension payment?
It would reduce the ADC by 8% of $7 million, $5.6 million, $70 million.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So, Ms. Riley, just a follow-up, and then I have Treasurer Lombardi. But that it would reduce the liability, you said?
It would reduce
the payment.
The payment.
So it would reduce the payment of, so instead of coming up with, what is it, 86.7 million, is that the number for this coming, oh no, 90 million, right? 90.4 million?
Yes.
Is that the upcoming number? So you'd end up coming up with basically 85.4.
Have to do the
Yes, Mr. Chairman, but the chairman, remember the school water, they pay as you go. They pay every month as part of their contribution. It's the city that has been basically endeavoring to make payments sooner than later on the general fund side. So the general fund component of that nearly 90 million is close to $73 million this year coming up. So it would be payment of that, that would save us the equivalent of 8%. I'm certain of that, but I think Ms. Riley gave you the answer.
Yes.
Now, Ms. Riley, does that mean if the market and everything remains the same?
It assumes that you have to, right, it assumes that money goes in and returns the 8%. Yes.
And it means that we have to assume, now let's talk about, that's a valid point. We have to assume that this upcoming next 12 months, right? Now, if this was if this was 12 months prior and we were having this conversation, I would honestly say I probably would have more confidence that the market, that rate of return we might hit and get there. Knowing what we know today and watching the market, watching the turmoil, watching what's happening, I have less confidence that the market will be as robust the upcoming 12 months as it has been, not the past 12, 14 months ago. Is that fair to say?
I can't dispute what you said. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball.
Neither do I. I'm looking at, and I'll give you an example. I'm looking at when I was there in October of 2008, and I know Eric Bernazzi was talking about when the market hit, at that time, it was a financial market crisis, and then what it took us to get moving up the ladder. Like I said, when we get to the other report, you will see that, and if I remember correctly, Eric, you can draw, that from 2007 to 2008, that's when the market dropped on us. Is that correct, Eric?
That's correct.
Right, and we went from about 350 million in the pension account to roughly 260 million because of that. And it seems at this time, by the way, what I'm looking at now, and all of you will see, the past 10 years or so, the great effort of Wainwright, we were able to get up past that 350 million mark again as of 2019. Now, because of the market, now it's dropped and now we're down to about 290 mil. And I know it's a combination of money being spent, but also it's direct relation of market volatility. And of course I'm going to talk to, have Eric talk about that. But when I look at my age report, which if you all look in the Wainwright report, the Board of Investment, page 2, that's one of the reports that I remember asking Wainwright to make sure it was a part of all our reports, and that will show you what happened in the past. Now, just so everybody gets a sense, in 2008, it was a financial crisis. It was a liquidity crisis. It was a different kind of crisis. Today's crisis is not just one market, but a slew of multiple markets. It's not a financial market collapse. It's not about credit default swapping. It's not a real estate market. It's everything, because the entire international economy just shut down for 3.5 months, and it's going to take a lot of work and effort to get it going. And Eric, in my description, is that a good layman interpretation, or am I off on that?
No, I think that's a good description.
Okay, so what I see is that it sounds good of what is being presented, Ms. Riley and Mr. Mancini, on the idea to borrow that money, but seems to me that idea might have been, in my mind, a more favorable or more enticing idea a year or so ago, or 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, when the market was, in theory, by the way, things were going, there was a far more consistent history of positive upswing. I think in this case, and now I'm going to ask you, Ms. Riley, if we don't make the 8% rate of return, and if we do take that money out, put it in there and don't make the 8% return, what does that do then to it? We take the money out, we pay it in advance, and we don't make the 8% rate of return. What's the turning point? Is the tipping point, like if we make 4%, then we still make, $5 million benefit? Is it 3%? We make 1 million, so you get my point? Like, so what's the rate of return that we'd have to definitely get in order to receive the savings that you just stated for the record? Let's pretend you had the ability. You were God.
If you're borrowing money at less than 8%, you just have to make whatever the borrowing rate is. If you have the money on hand, you know, it's the opportunity cost. What else would you have done with it?
Well, what I'm asking is that you mentioned that if we borrow the money and put it in, then it looks like and we maintain that rate of return 8%, we will then get that savings. Am I misconstruing that proposal?
You will lower the employer contribution by the savings amount because you expect to make it up with investment performance. If the timing isn't right, and some years it will be and some years it won't, if there's a drop in the market at the beginning of the year and you put the money in the beginning of the year, you're going to lose money on the contributions that you put in, and you're going to have to make it up later, just like you do on the rest of the assets.
Okay, so then I hear your statement. I just want to make sure I'm interpreted in the layman's interpretation. So my mind is that I would have to make sure I get at least that 8% rate of return for the next 12 months. And then if I don't, I will not receive those savings, the hypothetical savings that could occur if we made the payment all up front at the beginning. That's what and Mr. Almonte, and I look to Jimmy and Mr. Almonte, am I interpreting this right?
Yes.
Mr. Almonte,
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you're going down the line of questioning I was going to go down, and I agree with what you're saying.
And I agree as well, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so I just want to make sure. The idea of this idea, if it was 2 years ago for the sake of conversation, and where, you know, everything was pretty, you know, there was just this more consistent, a greater level of comfort in the market, the rate of return, I would think then there's a greater, the odds were in my mind, the odds were in our favor that we probably would make that kind of savings. My concern today, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that I think the odds are there's so much volatility right now. I don't see how that the next 12 months all of a sudden is just going to be, on a blink of an eye, everything's going to turn around, or next 3 months or 4 months. Eric Bernazzi, is that a fair layman's interpretation? I'm not, you know, am I seeing it in a reasonable way? Am I seeing it in an unreasonable way? I ask you, Eric Bernazzi.
I think it's reasonable. Literally anything can happen. In recent weeks, the market has been soaring. Since March 23rd, it's up 30% or more, even though we're in the middle of this pandemic. However, it fell 35% or more just before that. So literally, you know, markets can do anything during shocks, economic shocks, which you correctly observe and describe. So we just don't know. We can't know for sure. But could there be large losses in the next 12 months? Yes, there could be. That could absolutely happen.
Thank you. So I know Mr. Mancini had a follow-up question, then Mr. Almonte, then Mr. Lombardi. Then I think it'd be fair we can go to Eric Bernazzi's presentation and get a sense of what he has before us, and then we can then follow up with whatever combination questions for both. Mr. Mancini, do you have a quick question?
I did not have a question, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to get a clearer interpretation from Ms. Riley. The payment that is expected for this year is currently predicated on the 8% assumed rate of return. So, as has been past practice by the last 3 or 4 years, in combination with the city treasurer, finance has made early as possible payments into the pension plan, and with regard to investment return, and not having that ability to predict the fate of the market, we have seen interest reduction savings because of those early payments. So it's under the same premise. And while I am mindful of the fact that we are in more volatile conditions, I'm also mindful of the fact that we are governed by the 8% return. That's what determines the calculation and the payment that's due at June 30.
anything that we pay sooner. If there are investment losses, Mr. Bertinazi will talk about that later. Investment losses are made up in the plan under a average or a smoothing process over time, and so I'll have him speak to that professionally. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. McGinn. Mr. Almonte, Mr. Lombardi?
Is it in that order, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Mr. Almonte, and then Mr. Lombardi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions. The first one is, and Mr. CFO, I think you just mentioned you've paid it early, but when does the city actually make the payment? You mentioned they pay it early. Do you pay it in July? Do you pay it in August? When is it? What's early?
So, Mr. Almonte, so for the record, if I may, Mr. Chairman, allow me this opportunity. Prior to 4 years ago, I would say even further, 3 years ago, the city made the earliest complete pension payment at 100% in more than 3 decades. For many years, decade after decade, it took until October or November to complete the payment that was expected to be completed by June 30. Remember what Ms. Riley said.
Mr. Mancini, one second. Mr. Almonte, if you want to, just to help with this, when Mr. Mancini explains, if you go to page 6, 7, and 8 of the Board of Investment Commission's report, it'll show you the payments the city makes per month, dating back as far as 05 to the present. And then Mr. Mancini can give a little further question. It'll show you how the city's paid it, like, for example, how it pays it each month, et cetera, et cetera. Do you have that? Do you have the PowerPoint that in front of you?
I do, Mr. Chairman. I actually know the answer to my question. That's why I'm asking it.
Okay.
So, Mr. Almonte,
Yep.
I do want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Almonte. So my point is that for many years, decades, the payment could not be completed at June 30, as it's still today. But what's different is today, that payment for the past 3 or 4 years has been completed by the middle of July or sometimes even sooner, predicated on the remaining balance due at June 30. I think the last few years have been between 28 and 30 million, and we've relied on the pilot money that has been paid to the city in July for the year prior, and we've completed our obligation at June 30. But what we had done is instituted as early as cash flow would permit from general fund revenues, mostly taxes and other revenues, early payments as soon as we could, July, August, September, and then a planned additional cash flow regularly rather than trying to pay it all later in the year or after the year end. And so that's a turnaround event that has occurred with the significant collaboration of both Treasury and Finance working together to figure out best practices in that. But I want to remind the committee that for many, many years, cash flow could not afford to pay that payment until as late as November or October in a subsequent year.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. CFO. And the reason why I asked that question is because, first of all, if we agree that you would make 8% on your money, we're talking about 8% for a whole year. If you normally make the payment at the end of July, and now you're going to make the payment, say, July 1st, aren't we only earning 1 month's worth of interest and not a full year's worth of interest?
No.
If we agreed on the 8%?
No, because Ms. Riley has already testified that the calculation of the ARC payment, the ADC, is presumed that no payment will be made until June 30.
I understand that. That's what's
So
assumed,
every
but
payment,
you actually make the payment earlier.
But not in its entirety. We were talking about a proposed or a presumption if we could make it in its entirety in July. You would earn a full year's 8% ADC reduction.
Okay, I guess what I'm saying is if you normally have been paying it early and without borrowing, you would have been paying it early in the new year, we wouldn't be earning a full year's worth of interest. We already earned a full year's worth of interest by paying it early anyways, without borrowing money. Now let's say that we borrow money and pay it in July 1st instead of July 31st, we're really only earning 1/12 of that 5.6 million, not the full amount.
No, Mr. Almonte, with all due respect, the payment that begins in July 1 for the fiscal year that begins July 1 is expected to make that payment that the ADC calls for
before June 30 of the subsequent calendar year, but that fiscal year. So when we talk about a $90 million ADC, we have until June 30 to make that payment. When the year begins July 1, any money paid towards it, whether it's 10 million, 20 million, as we have been doing lately, we will save the equivalent of 8% annualized on that deposit as early as that deposit is made.
Okay, I apologize.
And so it does become a full year's interest savings if you made a payment in July. It's 11 months savings if it's made in August and so far. And the treasurer's aware of that because he has assisted us in making those early payments as well.
And I just want to make sure, gentlemen, hang on one second. And is that still based on that I still have to make my 8% rate of return in the fund, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
No, it's based upon,
Oh, no,
it's based upon the payment that's required to be 100% payment with 8% assumed rate of return. If the rate of return falls below or higher in the investment process managed by Wainwright, and then shared with Siegel, we make the new determination the subsequent year.
No, I recognize that you'll have to make an adjustment the subsequent year, but.
That's correct.
But in order for, here's my take, and you guys are the accountants, I'm just a humble servant of the people. In order for this proposal to work, all these elements have to happen, which is you take out the money, it's a low interest rate, you make the payment, right? And then on top of it, the actual investment structure makes the rate of return of 8%. If all those elements happen, then we get the full benefit of what's being proposed. If all those elements don't happen, that's the risk. So once again, it's got to do it, and this is where I went back, I did my little volatility of the market speech, which is, my mind is that I don't know if I have the same level of comfort in the market in the next 12 months, but I'll be perfectly honest, the next 24 months. It took a long time for the city to get back what they lost from the last October of 2008 financial crisis. I just don't see how this is going to be turned around any sooner or quicker. It's going to take longer. So my concern is that if all those elements don't happen, then what's my exposure? And at the end of the day, we're talking about, is it 5 million, Ms. Riley? Is that what you're saying?
That's yes, that's the change in the contribution.
So for $5 million, here's my take. And then we would have to pay that 73 million, we have to pay that within a year, correct, Mr. Mancini?
That's correct.
We have to pay it all back. So now, the following year budget, now that may be good for this upcoming fiscal year. I get a $5 million worth of savings. But then it's the next year, and I express it to my new colleagues and the colleagues of the first term. It's not even so much this fiscal year is going to be difficult. It's next fiscal's budget and the last one of your term. Okay? That's going to be where the city now has not only have to come up with X, they're going to have to come up with a $90 million payment, not now, but a year. If we take out the money July 30th, we're going to have to come up with that $90 million July 30th the following year. So that's just another, it's another major budget driver we're going to have to contend with. And that's in the interpretation. We're going to now get another $90 million worth of revenue. Or hopeful that the state will, or the state will contribute with their contribution, and then we have this $90 million surplus at the end of the next fiscal year. The problem I see is if it's about trying to achieve $5 million, it would seem to me we're better off to look towards first, what are the cuts in the budget that we can achieve first, before we try to put us, in my mind, in even a greater potential financial box for not this fiscal year, the next one after, when we have to come up with that $90 million payment. Now, this is my interpretation, and first I'm saying, Mr. Monty, does that interpretation, sound reasonable? And Mr. Lombardi, and then I'll have Mr. Mancini advocate for his position. Is my train of thought correct, or am I off?
You're on the right train of thought, because at least in my second question, and going back to my first one, Mr. CFO, I clearly am not communicating it well to you. So I think we should sit down offline and I can show you how I'm coming up with my numbers compared to yours. I fully understand if you don't pay it till the end of the year, that's the way the schedule works. What I'm saying is when you pay it earlier, and you've already been paying it earlier, but again, I don't want people's eyes to roll to the back of their head listening to us talk about accounting. But to Mr. Chairman, my second question is, if it relates to what you just said, if we really thought that we can make 8% in 1 year, then why did we have the previous discussion that we should lower the rate to 7.5% or 7%? Because it really shows that we probably are not going to make 8%. We might make 7%, and maybe that's the number and not 8. So that's really a question for Ms. Riley, because we're talking about saving 8%, but we already said we think that rate's too high, including yourself, that maybe it should be lower. So if it was 7.5% or 7%, wouldn't our earnings be less than the 5.6 million?
So
They would, but the difference is that when we did the calculations, we added 8% to the calculations under the assumption that they would be paid at the end of the year. So.
Right, but if we change the assumed rate of return, wouldn't all those numbers change?
All of those numbers would, yes.
And they certainly would.
And then if we were to continue to assume payment at the end of the year, we'd add, it would be a different calculation. The payment at the end of the year would be 7% higher than the payment at the beginning of the year. And the assumption is those assets would earn 7%. So yeah.
I get it. I get that completely. So, Mr. Chairman, my third question was still related to your conversation that you had was, let's just say, for example, we did borrow the money. We did put it on July 1st. My question goes to Ms. Riley and maybe the investment person is going to speak next. But to me, I look at that is that we're just trying to time the market instead of trying to do cost average purchasing throughout the year. And does it make sense to try to time the market for this potential 8% rate of return instead of what we really would earn over the next year? So my question is, would it be more prudent to do a little bit every month to do cost averaging rather than a one-shot try to time the market right at the beginning of the year?
Ms. Riley?
That's primarily an investment question, but, and I think you're right in terms of the concept of dollar, averaging it out. However, what I do think if you're talking averaging it out versus the current practice, which is paying it at the end of the year, it's you're not market timing it when you pay it at the end of the year, but you have the same problem paying it at the end of the year because it's all going in at one point in time. So maybe the answer is to put it in over the whole year, and on the calculation basis, we would take off about half of the interest charge if it went in on a monthly basis, because on average you'd be putting it in the middle of the year, and that may be a better strategy for on the investment side. It's really the same answer to the question the gentleman asked about taking the lump sum payment of your retirement benefit instead of over your lifetime. Some years it's a good decision and some years it's a bad decision, and you only know after the fact. But
Eric Bernardi, can you weigh in? Do you have a view on it?
Well, yeah, so dollar cost averaging reduces your volatility of returns. It does. But I think the one point that is being made is you're being charged 8% in the numbers. That's the interest rate you're paying when the money isn't in the plan. If you can put the money in the plan beforehand that's borrowed at a lower interest rate, then you can, in fact, make the difference. That's, in a sense, that's like refinancing your mortgage at a lower rate. However, you take the market risk that comes with that by doing that. So no matter what your assumed rate of return is, you want to get the money in when you're supposed to, so that you're not charged the interest cost, if you will, the implicit interest cost. But dollar cost averaging once a year or many months or, once a quarter or whatever, that reduces the volatility of your investment outcome as well. So it's sort of what's more important to you, and there's strengths and weaknesses to both approaches.
So what I'm going to do is, excuse me, if I may, because it's getting a little late, and I want to get to at least some of the presentation of the Wainwright organization, and then we'll just, this conversation is a continuing conversation. So we'll bring everybody back during finance. We'll also have other conversations with the financial people. So if I could ask the folks if we could just, I know you have other questions on this, but I'd like to move on to at least have Eric Eric present what he knows, what they've been doing, Wainwright's been doing with the fund. We could. Eric, could I take you through that? Could you take us through that, Eric?
Certainly.
Ms. Riley, did you have something you want to say?
I actually have a conflict. I'm wondering if
Okay. So what we'll do is this: we're gonna have you back, all right? We're gonna have you come back, but I'm gonna have Eric at least. I want Eric to do his presentation, and we'll probably bring you both back in the near future anyway, because clearly, if there's any good time to talk about pension reform during financial crisis, this is the time. When previous administrations and the present administration was reluctant to do pension reform, this is the time to talk about pension reform today during these financial crises. And this proposed budget is a perfect example to take the stand to help save the city. So, Ms. Riley, we're going to have you back. If everybody's okay with that, we'll go with Mr. Bernazzi. And thank you, Ms. Riley, for participating this evening. You were very helpful and informative.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Mr. Bernazzi, can you give us a rundown? And I believe everybody has your latest performance update as of May 22nd, 2020. And maybe quickly, I know you probably want to go to page 1 and page 2. Probably can stop there. So Eric, you want to take us from there?
Sure. We gave an updated report that updates through June 2nd, and we sent that to the city clerk for distribution today.
Excuse me. All right. Does everybody have a copy of it on the web? I'm sorry. All right, then I take that back. Then if we could, then everybody, if you could go to, we're gonna enter into the record, by the way. Actually, do it real quick.
Can you do Siegel's first?
Yes. We're gonna enter the record. What we're gonna enter is what?
B25.
So if we could, committee members, the Siegel report, the actuarial valuation review as of July 1st, 2018, enter into the record is D25. Identified.
So moved.
By Vice Chair, second by Councilman Taylor. Discussion, all in favor? Aye. Next, like to enter into the record the latest, pass unanimously, the latest performance update as of June 2nd, 2020, prepared for the Finance Committee of City of Providence, submitted by Wainwright Investment Counsel LLC. Identified as, it's a multi-page packet, identified as D24. D24, Vice Chair, make that motion.
Second.
Mr. Chair.
Councilman Taylor, discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. All right, Mr. Bernazzi, do you want to take us, I believe it's the same pages, right? You want to take, I think it's page 1 and page 2 a place to start?
Sure. I'll give you a very quick update on what the portfolio has done. Great. And then I will go to the next page or so, which will relate to the discussion you were having a moment ago with
you.
Okay? So, we have had the greatest economic shock in the history of our country, really, especially at least since the Great Depression, in terms of the speed with which the economy has deteriorated. That is unprecedented in our history. Just a couple of months ago, the unemployment rate was 3.5%. It is most likely around 20% right now, and may go up to, on a measured basis, on a reported basis, it could go as high as 25% due to the shutdown related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So the numbers are incredibly bad when it comes to what's happening to the economy right now. For example, GDP could decline at an annualized rate of 30 to 40% in the quarter we are in right now, in the second quarter. That's how bad things are. So by far the worst types of economic numbers that we have seen at least since the Great Depression, and with respect to the speed with which these things have deteriorated, unprecedented. And markets, of course, have reflected that. Now, on this updated, and I can talk about that to any degree that people would like, but with respect to the portfolio update, since the end of April, if you look at your middle column on your flash report, the portfolio has made 4.7% in just a little more than a month. That gets to the volatility that we were talking about earlier, and is now down 7.9%. Probably made another percent today. Again, markets are very volatile, so you're probably down, high 6s or 7% as we speak, but nonetheless, 7.9% through June 2nd. That was far worse just a couple of months ago. It was down over 20% at the end, at late in the month of March. But it has recovered massively since then, and that is a function of many things, but mostly government stimulus. The Congress has stepped in and already allocated $2.8 trillion, which is being spent very rapidly and handed out to the economy very rapidly, and we're seeing that in the numbers, and that is helpful. And the Federal Reserve has had absolutely gigantic intervention in the marketplace. In many ways, they have about 9 to 11 separate programs, depending on how you count them. They've already increased their balance sheet after taking interest rates to zero, essentially. They've already increased their balance sheet by about $3 trillion, and they will add more trillions of dollars. It could get up to 10 or 12 trillion when all is said and done. We'll see, but it's going to get larger. So massive money printing. They have bought gigantic amounts of treasuries on the open market, also mortgage-backed securities. They are also, for the first time, intervening in the corporate credit markets. They are going to buy bonds directly from companies and on the secondary market for the first time in their history. So these programs, they have intervened in the commercial paper market. They have intervened in the money markets. They are intervening in the municipal bond markets and directly buying municipal bonds from cities and states. And there was another announcement on that today. So doing unprecedented types of programs and in unprecedented size. This has helped a lot. You mentioned the 08 crisis. The 08 crisis, let's differentiate that one from today. The 08 crisis was a financial crisis which emanated to the real economy, and the financial crisis caused the shock in the real economy. This time it is the opposite direction. The shock has occurred in the real economy due to the pandemic and the shutdowns, and it has emanated into the financial markets. And in fact, in late March, the financial markets came very close in mid to late March to seizing and collapsing. And that is why the Federal Reserve and the federal government, but in this case, that's why the Federal Reserve intervened so strongly in the markets. And it has helped. So a big reason, a very big reason, that credit markets, bond markets stabilized, equity markets stabilized, other risk assets, a big reason they stabilized was the intervention of the Federal Reserve. And you can see it in the portfolio. These are very manageable losses right now, and we've just come back. It's just been enormous volatility in the last 2 or 3 months on the upside and the downside, and we continue to see it now. But things have been going in the right direction. Again, rallying again today. We should expect volatility. There are measures in the financial markets that tell us how much volatility to expect. One is called the VIX, for example, which I won't go into, but right now, from options markets are predicting that markets, say the S&P 500, will continue to move on average 1.5% to 2% per day over the next month, which is very large. Normally, it's much smaller than that. A while ago, in March and in April, they were predicting 4 or 5% moves in the market per day. That's how giant the volatility was and how scary the financial dislocation that was occurring because of the virus and because of the shock in the real economy. We've also had some good news on the virus itself and with respect to potential vaccines and antibody-based therapeutics, et cetera, et cetera. The rest of the world is starting to reopen as well. Europe is doing a little bit better. Asia is doing a little bit better, et cetera. The Southern Hemisphere is doing a little bit worse because they're going into their winter, and the virus is a little bit worse in the winter. But nonetheless, U.S. markets have recovered substantially in the last 4 to 8 weeks, and you can see it in the portfolio. So we now have, while we still have losses, they're far, far smaller than they were, and they're quite manageable, at least for now. You can see the portfolio is now $297.4 million as of June 2nd. Now, I will move on to the next pages, which would feed back into the conversation you were having, but I will take questions on the market or on returns or et cetera, or the economic impact if you would like at this time.
Mr. Lombardi, Mr. Almonte, you have any questions at this time?
No questions, Mr. Chairman, and I agree with all the statements that have been said. That's what I've seen in the market myself.
No questions.
Councilman Espinal, you have questions about the market?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, so how do you feel about the assumed 8%, knowing how the volatility of the market at this point and your assumption of the market in the near future?
Okay, well, there's the short run answer and the long run answer. When we make expected returns, and when you're thinking about, say, an 8% returns expectation, that's over decades. We tend to make those assumptions over a 20 or a 30-year period. For the next months or the next 2 months or 6 months or 12 months, literally anything could happen. I happen to think it's going to be quite volatile over the next few months, especially both on the upside and the downside, because there's a potential second wave. The economic damage that has been done is enormous. It's very difficult to explain how large that is. We also have another source of volatility, which are the elections, which will have an impact on markets in many different ways, both up and down, depending who wins. So there's another source of volatility there. I do think the economy is going to continue to recover, and I do think that the Federal Reserve is going to continuously hold down interest rates and pump in whatever is necessary to keep interest rates low to help the economy recover. The unemployment rate, again, will be up around 20 or 25%, and that is unacceptable to them. They will do anything possible to get that back down. By way of example, many of us think that the unemployment rate will probably be back down to around 10 or 12% by the end of this year. So going from 20 or 25 back down to 10 to 12, which in some sense is great, except that's still extremely high, and that's as high or higher than it was during the great financial crisis back in 08 and 09. So it gives you an idea of the magnitude of these numbers. Additionally, there is more fiscal stimulus coming from the federal government. That's going to happen. The states are going to get hundreds of billions of dollars with a very high degree of certainty in the next stimulus bill that's coming through. There will be other things attached to it, but whatever they do, they could break it up into more than one piece, but they will agree on something eventually, and it will be large. There will be many hundreds of billions, perhaps $1 trillion or more of more stimulus coming. We won't know exactly that for some weeks now, but there's more coming. You can count on that, and the market is seeing that and imputing that into its pricing behavior as well. That said, we should expect large volatility still in the coming weeks and months, both on the downside and the upside.
Well, that's good to
Okay.
know, because I was a little concerned, because the 8% for the next year, I think is a little unrealistic. But if we're talking about over a period of at least 10 years on an average, I think that's more realistic and that can be achieved.
Yes, well, that said, that still will be a challenging assumption to meet, and here's why. When you build your returns assumptions, and when you get down to the macroeconomics of this, interest rates matter a lot. And because interest rates are low right now, for example, the yield on the 10-year bond is around 70, 75 basis points today. That is historically low. In more normal times, back in the early 2000s or in the, before the financial crisis or in the 80s or the 90s, that rate was more like 5 or 6%, sometimes even higher than that. But across many, many decades, the last century or so, that rate averaged around 5 to 6% on the 10-year bond. And that is a building block, that is a component of the expected returns for other risk assets like equities or real estate or other types of risk asset strategies. So, given that rates are so low right now, and they have, extremely low, and will continue to be held down, it is, as the Siegel representative said, it is reasonable to expect lower long-term, or at least intermediate term, say in the coming 5 or 10 years, that type of thing, returns due to interest rates being as low as they are, and the fact that at least for the time being, at least for a couple of few years, maybe more, the Federal Reserve is going to keep those it's going to do everything it can to keep those interest rates extremely low. So that feeds back into what you can expect in the short to intermediate term, but in the very long term, say over 30 years, you would expect those numbers to be more closer to the long-term average, which would be in this 7% plus range, this low to mid sevens or high sevens range that you hear talked about so often. That would still be reasonable. 8% will be a challenge. It is not impossible. It will be challenging to do over the next 30 years.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Anthony?
I am so sorry, Mr. Chair. I have a 7 o'clock and I have to hop off. I just wanted to thank you very much. It was very informative tonight.
And we will be having them back again for further discussion, Councilwoman.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Eric, Mr. Minty, do you have a question about the markets, or you still have your hand up? Tina, can you put the hand down then? And Sherry. All right. So Eric, can you continue on?
Okay.
By the way, thank you for. I think you really helped. I hope to help my council colleagues and the people listening really put forward what's a true, reasonable tone of what's going on financially, because I don't think people are really understanding what's really going on and what's really happening out there. And I think the way you explained it, and by the way, just to let you know, that in October of 2008, when I was, at the time like I am now as a Board of Investment Commissioner, and you presented what was happening in October 2008, I remember the conversation when you had that if Congress did not pass that particular bill, that pretty much the economy was pretty much over. It was like, you were so passionate then, and of course that gave me great concern then. And listening to you tonight just further gives me flashbacks back then, and also gives me greater concern because it's such a bigger problem today. And I hope my council colleagues received or perceived the same feeling and understanding of where we are financially and how serious this is. This is not merely just a political game going on. This is not about politics. This is about the financial survivability of the city of Providence and our ability to keep moving forward in a responsible way. So I thank you, because you help emphasize and magnify how serious a situation we are in. So we can go. Can we go? Let's go into our your report, and we'll go from there, okay?
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the comments, and we'll move forward. Thank you. So if you turn to the next page, you will see what was previously mentioned. This is the value, the amount of dollars at the beginning of each of those years in the past that are in the plan. And you can see how they have fluctuated. You can see how it fell in 08, started to recover, stayed where they were, got back up to a nice high level of 350 coming into, 354 at the end of 2019. Now,
So you're talking about page 2, correct, Eric?
yeah,
The graph?
still on page 2, that's correct. There's a line graph, and then underneath it you can see the actual values as of the beginning of those years. We also put the 297 million, which is as of June 2nd. Now, that can be a little bit misleading because the city has not yet made its large contribution. That's coming soon. You could ask Mr. Mancini about that. But there's a lot of money that's about to go into the plan in the coming time period, which will take that back up. So that's not all because of market behavior. In fact, it's because if you look at the next page, if you return to page 3, I'll walk you through how contributions and withdrawals from the portfolio have varied and behaved over the years, and make some comments about that to help further understand what's gone on. This goes back to 2005, but similar story would go even beyond that. But as you can see, in 2005, for example, total contributions were $38 million. This is on page 3. And total withdrawals were 52.7. So that year, there was $14.7 million more taken out of the plan than was put in. Next to that, you see the net cash flow percentage. So what that shows is that 4.9% of the plan, based on the beginning value that year, you took 4.9% out of the plan that year on net. The net withdrawal was 4.9% of the portfolio. That's a large amount of money to spend, and that's a large amount of money to take out on net. That is withdrawals larger than contributions. You can see what happened in 06. You can see what happened in 07. Still negative, but a little smaller. If you go to page 4, I'll go quickly just to give you the 100,000-foot view. If you go to page 4, you'll see what happened in 08. Now, in 08, there were contributions of $63.8 million and withdrawals of $67.4. That was a 1% net burn rate or net spending. Now, in 09, after the crisis hit, you will see that the city was only able to contribute to the portfolio $43.4 million, but yet withdrew $71 million. You can see at that time they were taking about $6 million a month. That's what that shows. So on net, the city took out for benefit payments $27.59 million. That was 10.5% of the portfolio. So the spending burden on the portfolio was very large at that time. That's very big. Most of the time, pensions put more money in than they take out in order to grow the amount and to meet their unfunded liability. To grow, in this case, more was being taken out of the portfolio than put in at that time. You see, in 2010, it was a net withdrawal of 8.7% of the portfolio. But you'll see, we made 22.7% in 2009. You can see that in the far right-hand column. We made 14.3% in 2010, but yet you don't get a chance to grow those dollars in the account because even though the returns are strong, you're taking it out at that time due to the economic circumstances at that time. You're still taking a very large amount out of the portfolio on net. That is one of the reasons that line graph that you saw on page 2 was staying constant or not going up, even though returns were very strong, extremely strong at that time, and that's because the net withdrawals were large relative to the size of the portfolio. If you go to page 5, I'll walk you through. You see in 2011, the net withdrawals were 8.5%. That is, the city was able to contribute $54.8 million, but withdrew 80 for benefit payments, for a net difference of $25 million. That was 8.5%. Look in 2012, again, another strong year for the portfolio. We made 11.2% in 2012. Yet, we took on net 13.7% out of the portfolio. So the portfolio actually went down that year, even though you made 11.2%. Then in 2013, another strong year, made almost 20% on the portfolio that year. However, $58 million in contributions, $83 million in withdrawals, for a net spending rate of 9.2%. So you can see that's why the portfolio, the dollar value, wasn't growing, is because the withdrawals were far larger in percentage terms than contributions at that time. Page 6, go forward, you see the same thing. In 2014, 15, into 16, 7.5%, 7% spending rate, net withdrawal rate, 6% net withdrawal rate in 16. The good news is if you go to the next page, on page 7, you see that we have flipped in recent years. This is what Mr. Mancini and others were referencing, that now in recent years, look at 2018, for example, the city contributed $96.5 million to the portfolio, but only withdrew $90 million for a net increase of 2.1% relative to the beginning value of the portfolio. Last year in 19, this is calendar 19, similar story, actually put in a little bit more than came out. Now, if you, 0.3%, and we had made...
Eric Bernazzi? So basically, yes. It wasn't until 2018, that was the first year that the city finally made its full contribution that was the same... No,
that's not quite true. This is the money that got to the portfolio. That's okay. Not the same thing as the contribution of the city, because the city could have made contributions that went immediately to benefit payments and never came to the portfolio. This is the money that came to the portfolio itself. It is not the same thing as fully funding the ARC, or the actuarial determined contribution. There is quite possible, I don't know the answer to that, it's quite possible some money was contributed but was used for benefit payments that never went into the portfolio. So it's not quite the same thing.
So who would, Mr. Mancini, can you answer that question real quick?
I can, Mr. Chairman. May I remind the committee, and Mr. Bertonazzi will assist, this schedule is provided to you on a calendar year basis, when in fact we govern ourselves on a fiscal year. But with that aside, let me be abundantly clear. We have funded the city's pension plan 8 consecutive years at 100%, irrespective of market returns and savings by paying later or earlier. I want to bring you back to the schedule that Mr. Bertonazzi showed, not because of calendar year versus fiscal year. Look at all the earlier years prior to the committed effort. The payment that you see in October, November.
Mr. Mancini, we recognize that. We understand what happened in the past. I just wanted to make sure I understood that.
Well, the past has been prologue to the present, sir.
No, I know, but you know, that's also we recognize that. We recognize.
I'm just making the point that contributions were not made in a timely fashion, if at all. There were years, I think 18 out of 19 years in the 90s, contributions were not made greater than 60%.
Well,
that's an important consideration.
When I look at this, I also see the years of a mayor who claimed he solved the pension problem.
Well, I'm not going to get into that.
Mr. Mancini, and I'm not talking about the mayor who passed away. I'm talking about the mayor who claimed victory on pension reform.
Well, I'm talking about the administration.
I know. I understand. I'm just saying. When I look at this, I see that particular mayor was claiming victory when clearly they were not following through. But let Mr. Bernazzi continue with his presentation. Mr. Bernazzi?
Okay, I'll go to page 8, and you'll see that one of the reasons, as I said earlier in my talk just a few minutes ago, that the portfolio is down to $297 million. That is not losses all in the portfolio. It's just that we're still early in the contribution process, and the city is about to make their large contributions later in the summer, in the fall, etc. And so right now, there's been a net difference of $27 million that has come out of the portfolio. That is, withdrawals have been $36 million and contributions have been $8 million. That will flip soon, but at least due to the current time period, the snapshot in time we are right now in June, that is the latest, the most updated information that I can give.
So let me ask this question. I noticed that it looks like we made our payment on January of 2020 in February, but we didn't make a payment for March and April and May and June, or are we? Mr. Mancini, how come for those months we haven't made a contribution?
So, Mr. Chairman, there is no set schedule. We pay the money as we can afford it.
No. I know, I recognize it. I'm saying, but I'm saying that if we're gonna, people are talking about how we make sure we make a payment every month and get it squared away. It looks like you were being consistent, practically every month to make a contribution. So this is a major. So these 4 months equals to how much? How much is owed in those 4 months?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure that's accurate because we do pay over every month the amount of the school and water contribution. So I'm going to ask the committee if you give me the opportunity to look into that. I rely on Mr. Bertinazzi's information, but I do know that school and water makes their payments every month. They may not have been transferred to the trustee, or they may not have showed up on this schedule. The general fund pays as much as it can as early in the year, and then pays a set amount when it can afford to, and the remainder is paid generally at June 30 or later, depending upon the receipt of state funds. That's been a practice.
Are you stating that school and water might have made payments for the past 4 months, and that would, if they did, it would show up in those contribution columns? Or,
that is correct. That is correct.
So I guess the question is, why would we not know if school and water, by the way, since everything's been closed down for the past 3 months, let's call it like it is, right? How do we not know that those contributions haven't happened yet?
I didn't say that. I don't know.
I know that. But I mean, my question is, how do we not know that? How does Wainwright not know that? Like, how do we, shouldn't we know that by now? I mean, today?
We should.
So the question is, have they been paid or have they not been paid?
School and water pays per payroll. The funds are withdrawn per payroll, and they are to be transferred to the trustee on a regular monthly basis.
So, Eric, are you the trustee, Eric?
No.
Who's the trustee?
State Street Bank.
Okay. So, has the bank and Mr. Lombardi are the treasurer? Do you see that? Do you see the transfer as Mr. Lombardi? Treasurer? Treasurer? Gina?
I do not see the transfer.
Does the
Sorry,
treasurer?
Mr. Chairman.
Do you see the transfers, Mr. Treasurer?
I'm not sure if I see the transfers. Larry, do you notify me of all of the individual transfers? I know of the major ones you do, but from all different departments, do you?
I know that the city controller is responsible for transferring the funds to the trustee, and I will have that answer for the treasurer and the internal auditor first thing tomorrow morning.
So there's either two things occurred. Either one, the money hasn't been transferred yet, the past 4 months, or the money has been. And what I want you to do, Mr. Treasurer, is confirm. I want to make sure that either a couple of things. One, if the school and water just found out that we found out they haven't made the contributions, then also they give you the contribution now, right? And then it's, oh, we made the contributions. But I want to know whether or not, if we did not if we did not have this conversation, would that non-contribution by school and water be continuing? You get my point?
Yes,
Absolutely not.
I presume, well, I don't know. I mean, I would think that's a pretty important.
Absolutely not.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman.
Well, then,
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
time out.
Mancini, listen, you're the
Right.
chief financial officer. You should know if the contribution were made or not, and you can't attest to either way, so.
I'm
I
gonna
don't
attest.
want to belabor the point. I don't want to belabor the point. Just find out if it is. I'd just like to know
May
when
I
it
have the
was.
opportunity to speak?
Yeah,
May I have the opportunity
yes,
to speak?
Mr. Mancini.
I can attest that each and every month, those contributions are expected to be transferred to the trustee. I will give you the answer why they didn't get transferred yet, if they haven't already been transferred. That's the answer.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Auditor?
Looking at their cash flow report, I don't see any contribution. That's
Okay, so
based on the cash flow report.
this is, what report, Madam Auditor?
Their April cash flow report,
Yeah, Madam Auditor, you're looking at the general fund only. I have already attested to the fact that the
And
general fund
school and water.
cash flow, the general fund cash flow report reflects only what the general fund can or did transfer, not school and water.
it says PPSC, PWSC, WF pension contributions, 000. Projected in May is 3 million. Projected in June is 3.5 million.
I don't have the report in front of me, but Mr. Chairman, we'll get the answer for you tomorrow.
Yeah, all right, great. So, Mr. Bernazzi, it seems to me that there's gonna be at least a fusion of money, potentially from school department in water, that will represent the past 4 months, that you should be receiving, if you haven't already, I assume by the end of the week. Or if it's not, then we need to make a notation of why it's not, and then what's the impact of it as we move along. So, you can continue, Mr. Bernazzi, with your presentation.
Okay, well, I can really sort of stop now or take questions. I've given you where we are. I've gone over, yearly history of contributions and the size of the portfolio. So that was really all I wanted to cover at this time.
Could you at least go over one thing? And I want to make sure I'm reading this right. Can you go to page 9 and just explain what that page is and what that represents?
Those are the returns of the portfolio, the net returns of the portfolio for various time periods, relative to its benchmark, which is the policy benchmark. So for 3 years, 2.2 versus 2.9, 3.7 for the return of the portfolio for 5 years versus the benchmark, 3.6, 6.8 for the portfolio for 10 years, 6.1, and 6.7 versus 6.5 since 1996. Very recently, it's been underperforming the benchmark, and that is due to the value bias in the portfolio. We have more value in value stocks versus growth stocks in the portfolio. They have performed far less well than growth stocks. Think of technology stocks, et cetera, being growth stocks. Think of industrial stocks and banks and things like that being value. So the value managers have struggled in the last couple of years, last year or two, and the spread between value and growth is the highest it has been in history. That is, the difference in returns between growth stocks and value stocks is the highest it has been in history. For example, I have some data that's just a few days old, back to May 27th. But by way of example, for the trailing 1 year through May 27th, large cap growth stocks, domestic stocks in the United States, large cap growth stocks are up 22.34% over that 1 year period. Large cap value stocks are down 4%. So large growth up 22.3 over that 12-month period, large value down 4. We also have a lot of mid cap and small cap stocks. in the portfolio. Same time period. Mid-cap growth stocks over the last year, up 13.5%. Mid-cap value stocks, down 8.1. These are the indexes, not your portfolio, but these are the indexes, the broad market indexes, similar to the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones. Just to give you an idea between the difference in growth value stock. And small cap stock, just to finish, small cap growth is actually up 6.42% over the last 1 year. Small cap value is down 14.2% over that time frame. So that's what I mean by saying the spread in the marketplace, the difference in returns between growth and value has been enormous in the last year, and that is affecting the portfolio's return relative to its benchmark. But nonetheless, it's important to note in the last days and weeks, value has been catching up pretty rapidly, but is still behind. Those are, at page 9 is a historical, various periods of the return of the portfolio versus its mark.
So, Mr. Bernazzi, when you look at page 9, it says YTD, year to date, and it says the blue is the Providence. So year to date, it means starting the beginning of January, right? Not the fiscal year, correct?
Yes, that is a calendar year to date. That is correct.
And so at this time, at least at year to date, the rate of return right now of the portfolio is a negative 12%.
Well, that was through April. That's the last full month we have. However, if you go back to page 1, I updated you through June 2nd, and you'll see that it's actually down 7.9 right now, not 12. I have given you a flash report updating since the end of April. We don't have the end of May numbers yet because it's only June 2nd, and the custodian has not yet calculated those returns.
So as of April of this year, because of the volatility of the market, we're at a negative 7.9, it looks like, right? Am I reading that right?
Yes, since year to date now, from January 1 through June 2nd, it is now down 7.9%.
Right. So, Councilman Espinal, I referenced that specifically for you, for your edification. If you look at those pages, I think it'll be very helpful to get an understanding of the whole rate of return process and where we are. And I think those pages just show you how volatile right now the market is. It has been, and the major swings that are occurring. I think it'll be very helpful. And if you have any further questions, I know the auditor or the treasurer can help you with that. No.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks.
All right. Mr. Almonte, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This report has a lot of great information to help the city make their determination what that assumed rate of return is. If you look at this page 9, it really is quite telling, because if you look at the last column, it says since inception that it made 6.7%. That's over a 24-year period. Now, I know looking back is no indication of what to be going forward, but we went through some booms and busts over the last 24 years, and the best that we did was we returned 6.7%. So it really leads to that argument that 8% is too high and that it should be something lower. And that's why I said to a more realistic number. If you look at this going forward, I don't have a crystal ball either, but making a judgment going forward, I would say that's probably where we'd land another 20, 24 years going forward, be more reasonable to think it'd be 8%. And if you look as you go across all of these, even go back, even the best it did is the month of April, which is, I would never use 1 month to make my determination, but even that didn't make 8%. So that's the part that worries me, that even though we have $1 billion unfunded liability, I think it's much higher than that because I think the assumed rate of return is too high. And this page right here gives you a lot of information to let you know that it is.
And if I may just say, actually, you know, if you're in a good financial situation, getting 6.7%, you know, is actually a good rate of return. Anybody would love to get that as that, but unfortunately, because the system is so underfunded, it's not enough. So I'm going to say, and I have to say that on the other end, I got to commend Wainwright because they've done a great job of what they received. When they came into this, and Eric Bernazzi can attest to it, they didn't come in like they had $1 billion in the account, and all of a sudden this happened. They came in, I think, Eric, what did you have? Did you have like 300 million at the time, or 320? It was pretty much, you didn't have a lot of money when you first, right?
Yes, it's almost identical to what it was back then.
Right. So, I mean, I want to say that on the other end, so people understand, I commend Wainwright for doing a great job over the years of putting a good, reasonable, a financial responsible investment structure. But I want to make a caveat. Note, they received a pension system that was already massively underfunded to begin with. So it was financially impossible ever to get to this 100% unless there was great amounts of cash infusion on top of whatever liability or expenses you had. So I want to make sure we see that, because I know you may be first time seeing this, and I want to make sure he realizes that Wainwright's done an unbelievable job considering what they received. It's going to be, what, 25 years ago?
Just about.
Yep. So I want to make a note of that, and I want to make a note of what a great job they've done. So, any other? We got additional questions from committee members, council members? Mr. Almonte? No. Okay. So, council members. All right. So, Eric, do you have anything else you'd like to add? Oh, excuse me, Councilman Espinal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to question the amount of withdrawal. I know Eric mentioned it went anywhere from $83 million per year, maybe in 1 year. Then I think it was 54, then 29. Why such fluctuation? Why such a difference in the amount? If it's the withdrawal is made for the sole purpose of liability within the pension system. To benefits being paid out?
Well, are you referring to the net difference or the amount that is withdrawn per month?
With the withdrawn amount.
Yeah, as you can see, that it tends to go up with time. You know, at one point, you know, back in 2005, it would take maybe 4 or 5 million a month. On average, to pay benefits. Of course, as more people retire and et cetera, and time goes by, it's now was up to 6 million a month, and now we're actually at 7.5 million per month. So, you know, for example, in 2019, you know, $84.5 million was withdrawn from the portfolio. Luckily, 85 was put in, but we have to be prepared to spend a third, basically 30% of the portfolio every year has to come out on a monthly basis. So that sets our asset allocation, determines how much fixed income we have to hold, how much liquidity, how much equity we can hold or not hold. So we have to be sure that we have that liquidity available to make those. Now, again, luckily, as Mr. Mancini has pointed out, the city has moved mountains in recent years and is making that full contribution, and that makes a big difference. But nonetheless, we still do need a lot of liquidity on a monthly basis to those benefit payments. And the portfolio is constructed with that liquidity need in mind.
Thank you, Eric.
Okay. Any other questions at this time from committee members?
No, Mr. Chair.
So I want to thank, of course, Ms. Riley, who came this evening. Wainwright, Mr. Bernazzi, thank you for what do you call it, for participating. I think it was very helpful And hopefully it helped, it's always an educational experience for me. I hope it also is for my council colleagues, learning where we are and what's really happening with this pension account. And I also want to thank, by the way, because they've done a great job, and they continue to do a good job for the city, considering what they were handed 20-some odd years ago. They do a great job. I also, Mr. Almonte, I want to thank you for participating in the course. I think it's been very helpful. And Mr. Mancini and all the administration for participating. And a special thanks to the clerks. Clerks, once again, keeping city government moving. And I have to always thank them doing what they're doing. Do a great job. And we always should acknowledge the great effort they do. All right, and I just also make a note, by the way, I hope the next couple of nights, I know there are some, I don't know if it's a protest / looting, hopefully it's just a protest. I hope whatever events happen the next few nights, that it's a peaceful protest to talk about a serious issue that we all can hopefully get behind and hopefully address in a positive, reasonable fashion. And I hope that the people who've been trying to commandeer a serious issue that we need to address and commandeer for this personal and sometimes a criminal purpose, that they are kept at bay so we can continue with the conversation we need to about race, discrimination, rights of our citizens, interaction between our police departments and us and all of us and the people they serve and protect. It's always important that we always have a positive dialogue, and I hope the next couple of days, I know we're hearing about there's going to be more marches, I hope those are marches about positive progress, not marches about looting. So I hope we go in that positive sense, and I think on behalf of my constituents, myself, that I hope everybody's safe and we all continue with promoting a positive message of working together, trying to achieve and trying to work out problems, address those problems, and come up with hopefully a solution that we all can be happy as this great country deserves more and better from us and from everybody involved. Just a nightly note I wanted to mention on the record. So thank you all, and there's no more further. We continue all the other items for the next finance meeting. You did that already, Madam Clerk?
Did that already.
And if there's no more business before this honorable committee, do we have a motion?
Motion to adjourn, Mr. Chair.
Motion adjourned by the Councilman Steele. Discussion.